Can everyone hear me okay? What about you? And you're okay?
I'm good.
Sound check?
I'm
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting us today. So both Westley and I work for Arista. I think that's common knowledge. We do have a booth, so we'll welcome you to come to our booth after or during the breaks or whatever. I think there's some swag there. There's people to talk to. Wesley's going to be doing a whole bunch of demos on Lava's code that I think will be a little bit more interesting than what we can kind of show today. To start, I'm Jim MacDonald. So I've been around for close to 30 years in the industry in Toronto. I've had some experience with contracting, consulting, service providers. Now I'm at Arista. And then Westley?
Westley Dion. I guess it's been like 15 years of my IT, I guess, history or whatever along those lines. I worked for Nuance Communications for about 14 years, mostly the networking tech lead over there, and then I moved over when Microsoft acquired us. And then now I'm with Arista, and I've been using their gear for like, I guess since 2015. The stuff is amazing. Anyways, I work there now. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to poach too much.
So we're going to talk about Lava's code. So, quick show of hands. How many people currently have like a physical lab environment, right? And is it a full lab environment that can constitute your entire production network today, right? How many people have a virtual environment right now that they use on a daily basis, right? And you trust that when you make changes in there, you trust that it's going to represent in the real network? No? How many people wish they had that, right? Like wish they had an environment they could spin up, rip down, make changes, work into their workflow, and go forward. I think that's probably a big show of hands there. So what's happening today, and I think you guys can probably attest to this, networks are constantly changing. So whether it's adding new services onto the environment or making network changes or adding capacity to your network or just fixing the network and having to do something in a clutch situation, networks are constantly changing. So to have that methodology or process within your workflow to be able to do that in an effective way is pretty important. Most networks, and I'll do another show of hands, how many people have a single vendor in their entire network, right? Why? Why would you, right? Because you know the best of the best is in different areas of the network. Things change, mergers and acquisitions. You get a company coming into your environment, it's a different network vendor. Now you gotta learn that network operating system or that network as well as operate your existing network, and you gotta connect those two up in a seamless way. So multi-vendor environments are here, and they're here to stay. Automation is becoming prevalent, right? Like I'm sure everyone in here has some sort of automation technique, whether it's like writing your own shell script or doing a Python script or running Ansible like Westley does. However, if you don't have a good process and sort of validation and assurance with those network changes, what can automation do? It can automate a whole bad network change, right? Right out to your network. I have a good example of my times, maybe I think it was about 15 years ago, we had an engineer at a company I worked at that made a mistake in spanning tree and replicated it across the entire Toronto metropolitan network. Everything went down, including in-band management. We had to truck roll to every single site in Toronto just to get the network back up. It was a mess, but he thought automation was great. But he didn't really think checking the network configs was that important. So at the end result is what are we doing? We're testing in production networks, and that's probably not efficient. It's not good for our business, and it's not good for our customers. So some of the real world examples of failures that I've seen personally, and the biggest one, of course, is BGP changes, right? So not validating or making a BGP change, a prefix change, a route map change, or whatever, not understanding the context of what's going to happen can lead to some pretty catastrophic events, right, within your environment or within other people's environments. We've had issues like that as well with customers. Access list changes are common. Software updates. How do you test your software updates, right? Like if you have a physical environment, great, you can do a test, but is that physical environment replicating everything in your network? Is it seeing all your routes? Is it understanding all the context of user traffic and things like that? How do you really know that software update worked? Who's doing your bug scrubs, right? Who's validating that network operating system? And then just any change. I'm sure everyone in here will have examples. I've been at multiple different companies, as you heard, service provider environments where provisioning folks would make a network change. They're allowed to make network changes. and they turn up a customer and turn down about 5 more, right? And so any of those changes can have unknown impact, right? And it's just very, very common. So we talked about the risk gap, and this is kind of the process I think everyone kind of goes through before they get into kind of a good, methodology for a workflow. We're designing a change. We have a need. We have a requirement to either add on to the network or make some sort of modification to the network. We're going to then create a configuration. Then we're going to deploy it, and then we're going to hope it works, right? In between design and config, we're probably doing a lot of manual stuff, right? Like you're probably double checking the syntax, or you're going, oh, wait, no, that's the wrong VLAN, or whatever. You're catching errors, right? You're catching syntax errors, you're catching config errors, your IP errors, whatever it is. So hopefully you fixed some stuff there. Between config and deployment, hopefully your operations people have caught some more errors, right? If there are any, before they actually deploy, or as they deploy. But it's not very efficient. It makes very long change windows, and the business isn't happy with that, right? Because then they see risk. Every change is risk, right? I'll do another quick show of hands. How many people have a formal CAD process? Okay, how hard is it to get like a VLAN change or like a simple change through that, right? And they'll go, it could take down the network. They don't trust. There's a trust gap there, and that's because of the process. So, how do we define lab as code? And I think everyone's talked about network as code, right? The advent of network engineers having to be programmers. I mean, I'd say 10 years ago, everyone's kind of like hiccuping on it and going, oh my God, I have to be a programmer, this is crazy. Now we've moved on to a point where now we have to fit within that proper workflow as well. Like you can't just code stuff and send it off. You have to do it in a standardized way. You have to work with a team, right? So really, lab as code is kind of working into that same framework, but with lab, vendor-neutral lab virtual environments. So being able to pull up a topology, any topology. Maybe it's your full network replica. Maybe it's a piece of the network. Maybe it's just Montreal Metropolitan Network or whatever. Pull it up, make a change, test, rip it down, repeat, right? That's lab as code. So version control configurations, working into like a Git workflow. Automated repeatable testing, having some sort of method or process that you can run the same tests every time. So you know that these are repeatable, right? So you know you're not just missing something, right? And you're not going to have a problem. And then just being able to lab up automatically and have repeatable results. So as a vendor-neutral approach, we want to kind of put together some concepts. I'm sure everyone's heard of Container Lab, right? Very good framework. I think if you're in the kind of contract and consulting world, or if you're in operations, I think it's valuable. Obviously, container-based emulation is a lot easier to kind of emulate a larger network environment. It's a little more, or a little less intuitive, I would say, right? Like building out that topology is a little more difficult, so you do have to build out, a proper format for it. Other tools that we've used, EVNG. I don't know if you guys have heard of EVNG or GNS. Both tools allow you to do a vendor-neutral approach. You can have, there are multiple different firewall products supported, multiple different network vendors supported. There are, Ubuntu, Windows, all the different OSs from a server point of view. You can lab up an entire topology in a data center with server load and traffic, like user traffic within both of those types of environments, which becomes very valuable when you're trying to automate testing and understand what your change is going to do. Working into CI/CD pipelines, right? So that concept of whatever you're doing from a network point of view, helping you kind of address that on a lab point of view can help you adopt it in production, right? I think it's very important to get into a process of having proper coding and proper CI/CD workflows. And then just using things like Git and automated validation tools. I have up here somewhere here, I guess I don't have it on this screen, I have it on the next one, things like Batfish, right? Like tools that you can do validation and assurance through. So the new workflow we're talking about is, of course, CI/CD workflow, right? So we're talking about doing a pull request on configs. We're talking about making a change, and we're talking about updating that change, testing the change, and then pulling it back into the pipeline. right? A proper kind of approach to coding. So really, we're now moving to a design, an automation, assurance prior to deployment. So when you deploy, you're absolutely certain that it's going to work because you've tested it in a real life situation and scenario. And then at the end of the day, you can say, oh, I'm going to merge it to production. And then my operations folks can then load it into their workflow. So lab validation examples, I mentioned Batfish before. So really, what do we need to do from a lab validation? So first thing is syntax, right? And, you can do a manual process. You can look at it and go, I spelled switchport wrong, or whatever it is, right? But you can also load it into tools that allow you to actually check the syntax and validate that it's going to work on the version of code and the version of hardware that you're running, right? And then you have an assurance that your coding is going to work. It's in the right order. It's not going to be out of sequence. But you can also add that to a compliance standards, right? So I don't know how many people in here have a standards group or like a network standard for configurations that you try to maintain. I don't know how hard it is to maintain, but if you have a source of truth for those standards, then you can manage to ensure that every change you do is in the same format. Years ago, we'd have people building switch ports and putting different commands on every switch port, right? So you'd have no real validation of that standard. We want to be able to maintain that, so to automate that becomes very important. From a code certification point of view, now you have a network that you can load new network OS code on and test it against your current valid configurations, right? And workflows. Very important. If you find a bug in OSPF, you can address it. You know that's going to happen in production. So you can stop right there, open a ticket, start working through. Every vendor out there will accept the fact that your network configuration, your virtual configuration is going to be very similar to a production environment. They should not turn down that attack case, right? So you can work through those problems and do proper code certification prior to actually getting it into a physical device and then into the production environment. You can test things like routing convergence and prefix validations. So you can do, on Batfish, it's quite a neat tool how it does a synthetic routing table. I mean, that blew me away the first time I ever saw that, right? Was the fact that it could look at adjacencies. It could simulate your OSPF adjacencies, your BGP relationships, and look at those prefix lists, look at the route maps, look at all the interfaces and tell you what one router is going to see as opposed to another router. And when you compare it to real life, it was real, right? Pretty impressive, but it gives you a real confidence that things are going to work. As well as look at things like synthetic pings and trace routes and do some failure testing. And then the idea of using something as a source of truth. I put Netbox up there. There's tons of examples. But having some sort of tool that you can use that keeps all your information, your VLANs, your VRFs, your IPs, your standard configurations, right, in a source of truth so that you're pulling from that from all your automation. Nothing's ever changing. And then things like Near to do automated testing. There's other testing tool sets. If you come to one of our webinars, we'll show you ours. Cisco has theirs. Everyone has a vendor one, but what you kind of want is a vendor neutral approach because everyone does have a multi-vendor network. So you need to be able to test more than just with the network gear. You need to be able to do a ping or a trace route through the network, through a firewall zone, back through the zone, and back through the network, and see that whole path, right? You can't do that with a vendor tool. So you need open source. The big benefits, I think, are pretty obvious, right? Reduced outages, I hope, right? The main thing is to keep business confident, right? You don't want a situation where managers or directors or customers are not wanting you to make a change on the network. They're turning down your change requests because the last one failed, right? Just it's a nightmare for companies, and it means that you can't move on, you can't add services, you can't do anything, you're stuck. I've been in that situation with companies I've worked for where we've had poor success with change management, and then nothing changes. So much safer and faster deployments. Confidence from the executives and the customers, and then just the adherence to compliance standards. But one of the really neat things that I found, starting to work with kind of lab environments and some of the tool sets out there, and I think Westley will show you, even at our booth, he might even show you today up here, the ability to use that lab environment and your lab configurations as part of your networking documentation, right? as a consultant, I walked into 100% of the customers I walked into had no documentation or poor documentation standards, right? I would say it's 100%, guaranteed. They didn't know who updated it last, they didn't have revision control, or they didn't have anything. Every single project as a consultant I walked into started with a network discovery and a network assessment. And it was absolutely necessary because they didn't understand their own network, right? So if you have a way to kind of build this fabricated virtual network and produce a documentation that you can then train administrators, engineers with, or use as a reference, that becomes very, very, very valuable. So as we move from like more of a theory to practice, this is why, one of the things we wanted to bring Westley up for. Westley, as an advanced services engineer, uses this on a daily basis. So building new networks for clients, or doing augmentations or changes, or just testing or training. He has an environment that he has set up very effectively to be able to do that. So do you want to set up and I'll ask you some questions?
Yeah, it works.
We're just going to switch screens. Do you want to sit on top of this one?
It's going to slide right off, I think. Yeah. We'll swap.
There you go.
Yeah, I didn't want to take your spotlight by being up here with you, so.
So I just, first of all, Wesley, so in your day-to-day life, when did you start using kind of this concept or lab as code or this type of workflow?
Well, I guess in my old life, I used to have it in, I guess, real hardware, which is also expensive. It goes end of life and everything else like that. So it was just easier moving over to virtualize because at least all the code was in there. Like it was just easier to, I guess, just streamline what I was doing. So at least I knew what was in production and what was in lab is exactly the same thing.
Okay.
So
what are you showing us?
I am going to show you. Okay. So here it's my M&E, so media and entertainment, I guess lab in here. I hope everyone can see fine. It looks fine. So what I have set up in here is I'll actually give you like the real like prod environment, quote unquote prod environment up here. And then I'll have my container labs, I'll have my ACT, which is our internal tool, and then I'll have like the in-band, so through BGP and loopbacks and everything else along those lines. So I'm using the same config to apply to the lab, to production, to whatever other type of lab system that I want to do, because it keeps changing depending on what it is. So I will spin it up. These are all the devices over here. It looks really scary. It's really just a few groups. So if you're using your validated design, it could be anything again. Then I have my container lab over here. Again, this is our internal tool. And I have scripts that run in the background so everything looks the same going through. So
and it looks daunting, right, to like
it
adopt
does,
this sort of a process. So, from your perspective, kind of how would they get started, or how would people get started with things like VS Code and Ansible and
like right now it's just on my laptop because I wasn't sure how well the reception was going to be here, if the Wi-Fi was going to work or anything else like that. So everything I'm showing you is just on my laptop. So there's only so much room I could do, and it comes out to about like a gig per instance. So depending on how much RAM you have, you could do almost everything in here. It starts bloating a little bit more if you start adding more services to your devices, like Terminator.
So you're using as an IDE, you're using VS Code, right?
Correct.
As a emulator, you're using Container Lab.
Correct.
And
so on my Mac, I'm using
Arista COS, containerized EOS, right? I mean,
it's what I like using. It's what's my job. So I'm going to show you that. Yeah. So for this one, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with like the GUI view of Container Labs. The thing is awesome. I use this thing like all the time. So you could like unlock it over here. And this is the green ones are like servers or whatever that I'm gonna connect over here. It's media entertainment, so it's not exactly like most data centers. Like you have like your red lines and your blue lines. It's two different flows exactly at the same time. You don't really need to know any of that. So I'm just gonna hit play over here. It boots up. It takes like about a minute to start up, and there's like 15 devices now, plus the 2 servers and everything else like that. Full routing tables in there. I'm using ISIS as the back end for the links. And EVPN between all the devices at the end. So I didn't really have to do much to validate, like if I wanted to add a route or whatever like that, since I'm using Git, I could see exactly what the changes are. So it makes life, again, so much easier for me. So starting this stuff off, do it for yourself first and then show other people, because sharing is caring. So again, should only be about like a minute or so. It's usually pretty quick.
Yeah, the one thing too is like being able to stand up an environment, make a change, rip it down, stand it up, that's one thing. The other possibility is just standing up an environment, right? A virtual environment, and leaving it. And it becomes kind of that digital twin, right, of your production environment. And just leave it up, play with it, make changes, break it, fix it.
Exactly, like one big ESX box with like a whole bunch of RAM. So pretty much your limitations are RAM and CPU storage. Like you could pretty much use anything. That's really not a limitation at all. So pretty much everything just got deployed over here. So now all these things are up and running. I can just click on this device over here, and SSH, boom, I'm on there. Route, it's all there. These are all my ISSS, my direct connections. So pretty much all the networking is just working. Like nothing was working before, and poof, it's up and running. So any changes you could do, you just do on your lab, see if it makes sense. You did, I don't know, routing changes, you could do servers. You could actually work with your server team and have them just be responsible for like the green boxes in here, because you just want to do your networking. You're like, okay, you hand it off to them. Okay, is the VXLAN working? Is the EVPN working? Is whatever working? And just go from there. Because like I set this one up actually for a customer. I had to get rid of like a lot of names and stuff on this one, but this is for a live customer, and this is what they wanted to do. And they're like, oh, can I stretch this over here? I'm like, I guess we could work on it. So they ended up having to go through another carrier over here, then me handing it off to another site. So I'm like, I tested everything before we even got the gear on the site. So I could do all the testing in here, and when it was done, I just say deploy to prod, poof, it's done. And I'm pretty confident, 99%, that it's just gonna work. I haven't had any issues yet, so.
So it would save a lot of time, like from a, like we're talking to obviously network operators who have an existing environment that they're managing, but if you were standing up a new, like a net new environment, being able to build it virtually first, play with the configurations, make sure they're gonna address every need, every requirement, wait for your hardware to arrive, because everyone's got like huge delays in hardware shipments. But when it comes, stand it up quickly then, right? So now you have a shorter time toward getting your network up and running, essentially. And you have assurance it's going to work.
And you could do some other really cool stuff on top of this. So you could do like link impairments over here. If you could actually set the jitter and the delay and everything else. So if you want to like simulate, like again, this is for like a video broadcasting. You could say, okay, blue line's working horrible or whatever on this line. How's it working on the red line? Or anything else along those lines. And then you could do some really cool stuff over here, which I find is cool. You might not, but I find it cool. Is you just right-click on the link and you have your Wireshark right here. So anything that you're doing, your BGP, everything else like that, it's just everything's running in the background. So it's like you're actually on the device. Like anything that you could do on a real lab, you could pretty much do with this. I mean, there are some limitations when you're dealing with like ACLS or like QoS. Those are kind of iffy sometimes, depending on which devices. But like I would say about 90% of your commands you could get to work with this. So again, it's more of a confidence. Like this is going to work because I already tested it, and it wasn't hard to do it. So you just set it up to begin with, and after that, like I said, it's just clicking one button. You do your changes, you run your commands, and then everything's set up for you, and it's exactly like what you have in lab is your prod. So like you're extremely confident. So I don't like going into things not knowing how things are going to end. Anyways, that's me. So that's pretty much most of it. Like I don't want to take too much of this because we don't have that much time, I don't think.
Oh, that's good. And so anyway, we'll continue with a couple slides. But the at the booth, we're going to have Westley there with his laptop. You can ask him questions. Actually, you can ask questions right now if you like. I noticed the podium's ready over there.
Let me kill this.
But like think of it in terms of imagine just trying to be able to stand this up and leaving it up, pulling it into your NMS, right? Managing it like a real network. And just treat it like a real network. It's real. If you were to make a network change right now, how would you do that?
I just go back up to VS Code over here, and depending on what you're doing, you can do global vars over here. So I'm not going to show. I don't know if all the keys are in here. I change them anyways, but like this is more of like user login. Actually, I think it should be fine. I don't think I have any keys in here. The way that I have this thing set up is it takes my SSH key automatically from this host, and it just puts it directly on the switches. So I don't have to like worry about like what's the token and everything else like that. So again, I'm using a validated design on top of this one. So if I just want to do any changes, I'll just go to like the group vars over here, and I don't know what's a good change. Let's add another server. So I can just copy this out, this section here, copy, paste, put another server, connect the links in here, and this is my emulation. And the way that I have this thing set up is servers don't get propagated into my production. Servers are just set up for my lab. So I can put whatever I want in here. It'll do the configuration for the ports, but it won't like go out and try to deploy them. So this is more for testing. And again, you'd be working with like your server team for something along those lines. Or what's a good one here? Purple links. This is not too bad. So again, small groupings. I think it's reasonable, simple. Like it's just if you're using this type of setup, you just rerun it. So like I don't know what you want me to change.
No, whatever. No, I'm just thinking like so this turns into kind of your network standards.
Yeah. So I just do like
configs.
so I do whatever change, and I just do like a make prod.
Do you want to use the mic and then they
Build.
can record it?
And then poof.
Okay, I can repeat.
Do you have an example of a test, like validation of the network after you've made a change?
I don't have Enta set up on this one. It's like I said, it was mostly local. I was hurrying up to do this. You could just set it up afterwards. It's not too hard. So like this is mostly about the lab, not the testing. So I was more focused on that one. But yes, you could set it up for however you want. So you could use the same inventory file that'll just go through and use your Ansible scripts to go do, I don't know, ping test, is BGP up, or like, is the connection good, or anything like that. So like any test that you do in production, you could do on this. Like it's just normal IP addresses for it. So you could ping it from here if you wanted to. I know some of the addresses by heart, which is, if I could type correctly. So this is like one of my hosts right there. So again, everything works. It's just on my local system. That's all on here. So it's a full environment, like the whole thing. So you could start going like really crazy with this and add like Grafana and databases and everything else. I mean, you could really mac up and make an exact copy of what you have in production inside your lab. And it's pretty cheap to do it because it's on your laptop. You already have your laptop. So, and you could just, what I ended up doing also, which this one, I could show you it actually just building out itself. I might have to take it down. Maybe I'll wait until we're almost done because I'm gonna have to kill it if I do it. But okie dokie. So I'm just gonna shut it down first. Oh, click the wrong one. Here, click on this guy. Like that's it. I want to free up some RAM because I want to do something. Even though the setup on the Mac is actually pretty nice. Like 48 gigs of RAM, I have enough working room. I can't even tell if the lab is running most of the time, which is shocking, but it works pretty well with like orb stack and everything else. So for this guy, I'm just going to go back to my main host here.
But like hopefully you can see from this how you can take those configurations and they become your standard configs, right? For the production environment, and they can work into your automation workflow.
Yeah, so for this one here, just to give you like an example, like all my common files, excuse me, over here, and I have all my playbooks. So these playbooks are shared between every single one of my labs that I'm working with. As I got sick of having a playbook for one, I'm like, oh, I updated something over there. Let's go back and update the other one. So at least it's a central repository that I'm working with all of these commands. So like if I type like a make or whatever in that section, it's all the same make that I'm using for everything. So again, I just hate repeating and redoing stuff, and I prefer functions. I'm a Python guy. But here are my sites. So I just pretty much just do a copy of this one. If I want to make a copy of the entire lab for M&E, I could do it on this one. I could do it on the layer 3 lab over here. That one I just started working on. I didn't have enough time to finish it. And this is just for servers, so I could just break them up and move them around. But pretty much it's the same type of setup and environment, and I just click here and just reopen in container, and I choose my container. So this is my level 3 one, and this is my M&E. It's a little bit dirty in here because I was testing a lot. I think the hardest thing out of all this was just like cleaning up my desktop so it didn't look like a mess. like 70 windows open, and anyways, it's good times.
We'll finish up, and then if anyone wants to come by the booth, we'll have this. I have my EVNG environment where we can show you kind of a full-fledged data center environment. Let me just finish up a few slides.
You want me to switch? Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. I guess there's no other questions, right? Or we're good? I don't think we have enough time. Okay, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I speak a little bit fast.
Yeah,
you speak into it.
Very hey, Jean-François Richard, very good presentation. So maybe you mentioned this during your presentation, but what about traffic plane testing? Can you do some of that? I saw some
yeah. So. Yeah,
well, I was just going to say, and I can show you some of that back at the booth, right? Because there's lots of possibilities for running any sort of open source traffic generator, right? In my lab, for instance, I run web servers and things like that, and I'm testing all the time. With EVNG, for instance, I'm not sure whether you can do it at Container Labs, I actually have things like an LTE connection, and I have it set to have delay, packet loss, jitter.
Yeah.
So in my SD-WAN lab that I have set up, I have it set up so it'll actually flip between based on performance of a link. So I can actually simulate poor performance on a link,
Awesome.
which
Thank
is
you.
pretty cool. I think that, and of course, Wireshark's embedded in this
Yeah.
well.
Because I think I went over that in the section over
Yep.
here. You just right click on the link and just say, give me this latency, give me this jitter, and it's just there. So
Yeah.
it makes it a lot easier. Because
Here,
you
I'll
used to have to do the WAN emulators. But yeah, I don't want to take from your time. I got plenty of time all day today. Remember to tip your waitress.
Tip your waitress. Yeah, I think we have 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just wrapping up here.
So another question.
Yes.
Yeah, great talk and fair play to Arista for making containerized image available because most other vendors don't. So question, have you run into any performance limitation when you run multiple container labs on the same host?
Yeah,
Because it seems to not work very well.
It depends. So like again, on my laptop, I could do, depending on what I'm doing. So if I do like a straight COS, it's fine. But if you add like Terminator, which connects out, again, I'm using vendor technology here, to CVP with that Terminator, it takes another gig of RAM because it's doing so much metrics. So like it starts to suck up a lot, yes.
No,
So
sorry, I have to clarify my question. Let's say there is plenty of CPUs, plenty of
Okay.
resources on the server, but if you run just multiple different labs with container lab on the same host, it seems to not work very well. I wonder if you hit.
How big
those
are the
problems.
labs though? Like,
Yeah.
are they?
Like after 5, 6, not even that many.
Oh, that's
okay.
interesting.
Well, it depends on,
If it's
like, are you
plenty-
talking like
if
on a
it's
server
plenty of
system with like a whole bunch of RAM available? Because that's usually the biggest thing. So either between CPU, I mean, that's more of a server kind of problem with Docker. Because it's just an interface on top of it, right? So it's more of a Docker issue at that point. It wouldn't be a device issue. At least I don't think so.
It seemed to be specifically with container lab because
That's
I'm
interesting.
Okay.
considering even going back to KVM, which is not as good as Docker container in terms of performance, but it doesn't.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
it's also not made for like, like doing 10 gigs of traffic either. So like it's made for minor things, but if it's slowing down, I get it. But we could talk about it afterwards if you want to.
Yeah, try it
Well,
out.
just
Yeah,
curious.
because I'm actually pretty
because
interested in what you're trying to do, so at least I could emulate it too, and then work from
Yeah.
there and make it better. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So just to kind of quickly wrap up, because I know we only have about 3 minutes left.
can do it.
What's that?
You can do it.
I can do it. What are the big business impacts? We've talked about this before, like lower risk, faster change cycles. So obviously you can get through that CAD process a lot quicker. With reduced outages, of course, you have better confidence from the business, easier compliance to the standards, lower chance of failure. So where is this going? So I think ultimately it's going to the fact that, and actually you just mentioned, some obviously performance issues with container labs potentially, but a lot of environments, a lot of companies now are going to this concept of doing a full network digital twin, right? Having an entire network replicated across your virtual infrastructure. Now we've been doing this for years, but we've been doing it with tons of CPU, tons of memory. I worked at a company 10 years ago where we had a digital twin of a national network set up, and that was just virtualizing OSs. We couldn't do everything. We couldn't do the firewalls. There were a lot of pieces and nodes that we couldn't replicate. There were ASIC issues, right? Things like that. But now it's different. Now I think the code's there. So you should feel comfortable that you should be able to actually roll out an environment that simulates your network and keep it managed and maintain it to help the process and help your business. And that's about it. I guess we'll wrap it up.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yep.